Under a sky bruised by the flash of paparazzi cameras, Meghan Markle stepped into the night, not with the confident stride of a woman used to headlines, but with a faltering shuffle. Her eyes were hollow, red-rimmed, her posture slumped, not the poised duchess the world was used to seeing, but a woman on the brink. She pulled her coat tighter, perhaps against the cold, or perhaps against the unbearable weight of humiliation. What had begun as a royal love story, a fairy tale escape from palace protocol, was spiraling into something far darker. And this time, there was no palace wall to hide behind. At the heart of this unraveling wasn't a tabloid rumor, a fashion faux pas, or even a documentary backlash. It was a lawsuit. Cold, brutal, and deeply personal. The man suing her wasn't a distant critic or a media mogul. He was once the closest to her, her personal bodyguard. A man whose duty was to shield her from the chaos of public life. Now he was the one unleashing it. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The allegations weren't just scandalous, they were devastating. Claims of unwanted advances, forced interactions, and a toxic misuse of power sent shockwaves not just through celebrity circles, but through royal historians, feminists, and even Meghan's most ardent supporters. The public, already divided on the Duchess of Sussex, now found themselves asking a much grimmer question. What happens when the protector needs protection? But let's rewind. How did it come to this? How did the carefully constructed image of the American princess, the woman who had braved British aristocracy with style and steel, crumble into a tabloid nightmare, one court motion at a time? Meghan Markle had always been a polarizing figure. Long before her relationship with Prince Harry catapulted her into global fame, she was known for her advocacy, her mixed-race identity in an overwhelmingly white industry, and her outspokenness on issues many actresses steered clear of. But the royal marriage amplified everything. Every gesture was analyzed, every word dissected. She was either a trailblazer or a manipulator, depending on which side of the media divide you stood on. And yet, for all the talk of racism, royalty, and resentment, no one could have predicted this latest chapter. Lawsuits weren't new to the Sussexes. Both had sued the press in the past. But this was different. This wasn't about intrusion. It was about violation. Emotional, physical, and reputational. It was the kind of accusation that clings like smoke, even if proven false. And unlike past controversies, this one had a face. A man. A voice. A sworn affidavit. A quiet man who had spent years in the background, now stepping forward with claims that shook the ground beneath Meghan's already fragile public image. The lawsuit, filed discreetly in Los Angeles Superior Court, alleged that Meghan had repeatedly made inappropriate advances toward her bodyguard during private outings and overnight stays, allegedly leveraging her status and privacy against his silence. According to the complaint, the incidents took place over a span of several months, quiet, persistent, and escalating. The document described moments that, if true, blurred the line between flirtation and coercion, privacy and manipulation. It spoke of whispered invitations, uninvited touches, and the subtle but suffocating pressure that comes when the person you're paid to protect becomes the very source of danger. The first time the news hit the wires, disbelief was the dominant reaction. Meghan? The same Meghan who had championed women's rights on global platforms? The Meghan who had spoken at the UN, whose words about empowerment had echoed through international conferences. It couldn't be. It had to be a smear campaign, another ugly twist in a long pattern of attacks against her. That was the immediate defense from her fans and representatives alike. But then came the documents. Court filings, eyewitness accounts, journalistic corroborations. This wasn't just tabloid fodder. It was a legal proceeding. The media swarmed. News anchors hesitated as they read the claims aloud on national TV, aware of the cultural firestorm that might erupt. Supporters of Meghan pointed fingers at the palace, at coordinated takedowns, at misogyny wrapped in legal jargon. But others, especially those outside her loyal fanbase, began connecting dots. Had there been signs? Had her and Harry's sudden changes in staff hinted at deeper unrest? What of the rumors about employees quitting without explanation, or security personnel requesting transfers mid-contract? The timeline of the lawsuit seemed to align eerily with a string of resignations in Montecito, quiet exits that, at the time, were brushed off as normal turnover. But the Bodyguard's legal team painted a very different picture. In a damning statement, they claimed he had tried multiple times to report his discomfort internally, only to be warned that going public could cost him not just his career, but his safety. And perhaps that was the most chilling detail of all, not just the accusation itself, but the implication that behind Meghan's carefully curated image of strength and solidarity was a woman capable of instilling fear. As for Prince Harry, his silence was deafening. Not one comment, not one tweet. The man who had once stood by Meghan through storms of controversy now seemed locked behind emotional battlements. Sources close to the couple whispered of tension, of arguments, of betrayal, not just of marriage vows, but of the brand they had built together. And the brand was suffering. Meghan and Harry's production deals, partnerships, and planned speaking engagements began drying up. Sponsors who had aligned themselves with Meghan's feminist image quietly pulled back. Netflix, Spotify, and other industry titans seemed unsure how to proceed. One insider from an LA-based streaming giant confessed, "We just don't know what we're endorsing anymore. Everything's in free fall." But while the public dissected legal terms and pored over every release document, behind closed doors, Meghan was reportedly falling apart. A close friend, under anonymity, shared that Meghan hadn't slept in days, cried often, and had begun retreating from both media and social obligations. "This isn't just scandal for her. It's a personal implosion," the friend said. "She feels hunted, betrayed, and utterly exposed." Interestingly, the bodyguard in question was not some disgruntled opportunist. He had served with distinction in multiple countries, protected high-profile politicians, and received commendations for crisis response. His record was impeccable. His demeanor, according to those who knew him, was discreet, professional, and fiercely loyal. He hadn't spoken to the media. He hadn't done interviews. He filed the lawsuit, submitted evidence, and let the legal process speak for itself. It was this calculated silence that unnerved many. It wasn't just a he-said-she-said tabloid game. It was a measured, intentional unveiling. In private, Meghan reportedly struggled with the paradox of it all. How could someone so invisible suddenly become her most dangerous threat? Was this revenge? A smear job orchestrated by enemies within? Or, more terrifyingly, was it the unearthing of something she thought would never see daylight? The answer, as the world would soon learn, was complicated. Because this wasn't just about one lawsuit. It was about control, about image, about the sometimes unseen consequences of unchecked power, even when that power is cloaked in charisma and activism. It was about the uncomfortable reality that anyone, royalty included, can fall prey to their own mythology. As the introduction of this tangled and emotional exposé draws to a close, the questions loom larger than ever. What really happened between Meghan and the man paid to shield her? How did an alleged victim of misconduct become the instigator of the most explosive royal-related scandal since Megxit? And in the shadows of courtrooms, broken trust, and shattered reputations, who, if anyone, will emerge unscathed? Because one thing is certain, no matter how you feel about Meghan Markle, this story will challenge your assumptions, stir your emotions, and keep you questioning until the final frame. From the moment Meghan Markle stepped onto the global stage as Prince Harry's partner, the world was swept into a whirlwind of narratives. She wasn't just an American actress. She was an icon in the making, a biracial, independent woman who had navigated Hollywood's unforgiving terrain and had now captured the heart of Britain's most rebellious royal. She stood for change, for defiance, for the promise that even the oldest institutions could evolve. And for a time, that narrative held firm. When the wedding bells rang at St. George's Chapel in 2018, millions around the globe tuned in, not just for the romance, but for the symbolism. This was not just another royal union. This was supposed to be the fresh start the monarchy needed. Meghan's biracial heritage, her activism, her career outside the traditional mold, all of it represented modernity crashing into centuries of tradition. The press celebrated it with headlines declaring a new era for the monarchy, and the world applauded. Yet, barely a year later, the tone began to shift. Suddenly, the fairy tale gloss dulled. Stories emerged of internal conflict within the royal family, of staff resignations, of tense holidays, and of a growing rift between Harry and his brother William. Whispers became headlines, and headlines became battle cries. Meghan, once lauded, was now dissected. Her wardrobe choices, her baby shower, even how she held her child, all turned into cannon fodder for tabloids. The narrative fractured, and Meghan began to retreat. This is when the Sussex brand began to form. The departure from royal duties, the Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the Spotify deal. At each step, Meghan and Harry framed themselves as survivors of an archaic and cruel system, victims of media vitriol and royal rigidity. And to millions, that framing made sense. After all, what kind of family would turn its back on a woman subjected to relentless racist undertones? Who could forget that infamous question Meghan claimed someone in the royal family asked about what their unborn son's skin color might be? But within that narrative of survival and reinvention, a pattern quietly emerged, one often ignored by fans, but noted by critics. A trail of broken relationships, former staffers who left in silence, media allies who cooled off, former friends who no longer appeared in the public eye. Each departure was explained away: overwhelmed aides, biased press, jealous relatives. Yet those absences, in hindsight, now feel like breadcrumbs, early signs that the image being presented may not have told the full story. The golden narrative, the one built on victimhood and resilience, began to buckle under the weight of contradiction. And when the lawsuit dropped, it didn't just hit like a bombshell. It shattered the carefully polished illusion. The initial headlines were almost too surreal. Meghan Markle accused of inappropriate behavior by her bodyguard, filed quietly in a Los Angeles court. The lawsuit contained language that was clinical and devastating. The plaintiff, a former royal protection officer turned private security contractor, alleged multiple incidents spanning months, each more distressing than the last. The public didn't know whether to be shocked or skeptical. It was too dark, too off-brand, too unexpected. But then came the details. According to the court documents, the bodyguard had first met Meghan during a high-profile security assignment after Megxit. She had reportedly requested him specifically after seeing his profile through a private agency. The assignment was confidential, the hours long, and the proximity unavoidable. At first, their working relationship was described as professional and mutually respectful. But things allegedly changed once trust and familiarity were established. The complaint described private dinner invitations that seemed innocent until they weren't. Moments where Meghan allegedly crossed physical boundaries under the guise of casual gestures. Late-night conversations that began with vulnerability and veered into suggestiveness. And finally, according to the plaintiff, a confrontation in a private suite at a Montecito property that crossed the final line, leading him to terminate the arrangement and, later, take legal action. The filing wasn't rushed. It was structured, backed by witness testimonies from two former employees who claimed to have observed behavior that made them deeply uncomfortable. Security footage was referenced. Communications, emails, and text messages were attached as sealed exhibits, pending court approval. The bodyguard's legal team made it clear this was not an opportunistic cash grab. This was, in their words, about setting the record straight and protecting future employees from similar distress. For the Sussex brand, built on justice, empathy, and emotional intelligence, the lawsuit struck at the core. It called into question everything the public had been led to believe. How could a self-proclaimed advocate for dignity and equity be accused of such behavior? How could the woman who urged women to speak up about abuse be facing allegations that, if true, mirrored the very power imbalances she claimed to fight? The media reacted with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Some outlets hesitated, fearful of backlash. Others ran the story immediately, treating it with the same fervor they would apply to a scandal involving a head of state. Meghan's legal team responded swiftly, calling the claims categorically false and deeply damaging to all parties involved. But the statement lacked the emotional punch her previous responses carried. There was no Oprah-style confessional, no viral speech, just a polished, cautious press release. And to some, that silence said more than any words could. Online, the reaction was chaotic. Social media divided into battlegrounds. Her defenders pointed to the decades of abuse she had suffered, arguing that the timing was suspicious, that the bodyguard might be an opportunist, or worse, a pawn. But others, particularly those who had once supported her, began expressing discomfort. Not judgment, not condemnation, just an unease that something, somewhere, wasn't adding up. Hollywood watched carefully. Executives, producers, and publicists, all keenly aware of the PR implications, began re-evaluating their association. While no public statements were made, whispers of on pause deals started circling. Brands that had aligned with Meghan's values began issuing internal memos about monitoring developments. In entertainment, perception is everything. And suddenly, perception was no longer on her side. Yet the most chilling aspect of this chapter wasn't in the headlines. It was in what the Bodyguard's lawsuit represented, a challenge to Meghan's core image. Not just as a feminist, but as someone morally grounded, emotionally aware, and ethically consistent. The allegations weren't of violent assault. They were of psychological discomfort, of a slow erosion of professional boundaries. The kind of misconduct that exists in the shadows, not in viral headlines. And perhaps that's what made them so disturbing. Because if true, they suggest a version of Meghan that doesn't align with any of the stories we've heard before. A version that sees vulnerability not as a shared experience, but as something to exploit. And a version that, behind the stage smiles and humanitarian hashtags, may have wielded power in a way far removed from the values she espouses. By the end of that week, the world was no longer asking, did Meghan break free from a cruel monarchy? It was asking, did she build her own monarchy, and in doing so, become what she once fled from? The golden narrative, once burnished and bright, now bore cracks that no amount of PR could mend. What remained was uncertainty, and a growing sense that the story we thought we knew might only have been the beginning. Long before Meghan Markle became the Duchess of Sussex, before the Netflix specials and the primetime interviews, she was introduced to a tightly guarded world few ever truly understand. One ruled not by cameras and applause, but by quiet codes of conduct, layers of unspoken hierarchy, and invisible guardians. Behind the polished royal image was an intricate security system, one where bodyguards weren't just assigned, they were cultivated. To be trusted with the protection of a royal, especially one as controversial and public-facing as Meghan, was no ordinary task. The men and women chosen for royal protection were not your average security detail. They were meticulously vetted through MI5, the Metropolitan Police's royalty and specialist protection branch, or private elite security firms contracted directly by the Crown. These individuals underwent years of physical training, psychological testing, and situational combat readiness. More than anything, they were trained to disappear, an ever-watchful presence that blended into the backdrop of royal life. So, when Meghan and Harry began their journey together, her safety became a priority, first under royal security, then, after Megxit, through elite private teams. But unlike traditional royal assignments, Meghan's situation was volatile. Her press coverage was explosive, her public appearances were relentless, and her departure from the royal family meant leaving behind the UK's full state-funded security umbrella. She would need private protection, handpicked and paid from her own pocket. That's when the dynamics shifted. Within the palace, the relationship between royals and their security personnel is traditionally marked by strict professionalism. There is little room for personal intimacy or socializing. Yet, as Meghan moved further from palace oversight and deeper into the curated world of celebrity, her relationship with her security team also began to reflect that shift. The lines became blurred, not necessarily in behavior at first, but in proximity, familiarity, and control. Insiders revealed that Meghan and Harry, now free from Buckingham's protocols, were adamant about choosing their own staff. They reportedly favored hiring Americans with backgrounds in both high-profile celebrity protection and military training. The logic made sense. They wanted a team that could navigate both fame and threat. But that freedom came with risk. Without the rigid oversight of palace infrastructure, the boundaries between employer and employee began to bend. The man now suing Meghan was selected during this period, a time when the couple had relocated to North America, were building their brand, and were shrouded in media attention following their Oprah interview. According to sources familiar with the hiring, he had an impeccable track record. Formerly employed in conflict zones, assigned to private billionaires, and trained in high-stakes extraction scenarios, he was everything the couple needed. loyal, efficient, discreet. But there was another detail. Unlike the typical stoic royal protector, this bodyguard was reportedly affable, charismatic, and perhaps, as one former staffer whispered, too visible for the job. Meghan, always drawn to people with strong personalities, reportedly took a liking to him early on. They shared jokes. She asked him about his background. She invited him to sit during lunch breaks. Harmless gestures on the surface, but ones that raised eyebrows among other staff used to more formal dynamics. One of the more troubling details revealed in the early stages of the lawsuit was the lack of a third-party HR mechanism within the Sussex household. While employed under royal protection, grievances could be submitted formally through the royal household human resources system. However, once Meghan and Harry were operating independently in the U.S., complaints fell into murkier territory. Private hires meant private protocols. And for someone like a bodyguard, whose loyalty was a non-negotiable condition of employment, voicing concern wasn't just difficult, it was dangerous. The irony, said one former royal staffer, is that she left the palace claiming it was toxic, yet created a system with even less protection for those around her. The palace, for its part, has remained characteristically silent. Buckingham Palace neither confirmed nor denied that it had received warnings or signals of Meghan's post-departure staff conduct. But sources close to Royal Protection Services admitted off-record that they were concerned by what they've heard in the press. There was an unspoken implication. This would not have happened under Palace Watch. That detail, whether Meghan's alleged misconduct was a product of her freedom, has become a central point of public discourse. Supporters argue that the claim itself is a trap, a way to punish a woman who dared to step outside the system. But critics say the situation is a textbook example of power imbalance unchecked by institutional accountability. In the bodyguard's lawsuit, he claimed that early warning signs were dismissed, that subtle gestures, touches on the arm, late-night texts, suggestive compliments, were normalized under the guise of friendliness, that when he sought clarity or attempted to distance himself, the mood soured. He reported a change in Meghan's demeanor. The joke stopped. The invitations became more pointed. His presence, once essential, began to feel precarious. One section of the filing stated, plaintiff was placed in a compromising position, one where his employment and personal safety appeared dependent on compliance with emotional and physical boundaries that shifted daily, without formal HR guidance, oversight, or recourse. This sentence hit hard, because it was no longer just about Meghan's behavior. It was about an entire structure built without safeguards. A system where those meant to serve had no mechanism for self-protection. Public reactions became more polarized. Meghan's critics pointed to her alleged need for control and obsession with loyalty as red flags. Her defenders claimed that the lawsuit was a consequence of her visibility, that a woman constantly in the public eye would inevitably attract opportunists. Yet amid the shouting matches on Twitter and endless YouTube reactions, one truth remained stubborn. This lawsuit existed. It had passed the threshold of gossip. It had entered the domain of facts, filings, and eventual judgment. And for the first time since her royal wedding, Meghan had lost control of the narrative. Within the walls of Buckingham Palace, walls she once tried so hard to escape, a sense of vindication reportedly simmered. Not celebration, not satisfaction, but a quiet acknowledgement that the rules, for all their coldness, had a purpose. That boundaries were not just constraints, they were protections. And now, outside those walls, Meghan was facing what happened when those protections failed. He had always been a shadow, a silent, composed presence positioned a few steps behind the person he was sworn to protect. His name was rarely known outside of professional circles. No social media, no selfies with celebrities, no post-service tell-alls. He operated in silence, exactly the way he was trained to. But that silence, over time, became a burden, and eventually, a weapon. The man now suing Meghan Markle was not a tabloid-hungry opportunist. He was a seasoned security professional, someone whose credibility had been built not in headlines, but in years of service under high-risk, high-profile conditions. That's precisely why his accusations rattled the world. His story didn't begin with Meghan. Long before he stood at the edge of her spotlight, he had worked in some of the world's most volatile environments. His record was filled with commendations from government officials, business tycoons, and even foreign dignitaries. He had protected tech billionaires in San Francisco, escorted CEOs through civil unrest in South America, and once quietly helped extract a celebrity couple from a kidnapping threat in the Middle East. He wasn't just a bodyguard, he was a strategist, a fixer, and, when necessary, a wall between life and death. So when Meghan Markle's team reached out through a top-tier security agency after she and Harry stepped away from royal life, his name rose quickly to the top of the list. He was discreet, experienced, and used to working in environments where PR optics were just as critical as physical safety. By all accounts, it was a perfect fit. At first, everything went smoothly. He admired Meghan's ability to manage relentless press attention and was sympathetic to the toxicity she faced. His job was to make sure she could navigate the world without fear. And for a while, that's exactly what he did, standing between her and screaming photographers, ushering her through hotels, securing perimeters for events, vetting strangers who came too close. It was thankless, invisible work, the kind that gets noticed only when something goes wrong. But over time, something began to shift. It was subtle at first, little things, requests that didn't come through her chief of staff, but from Meghan herself. Private errands, last-minute schedule changes, invitations to personal gatherings where staff typically weren't included. She would ask about his past work, his time in conflict zones, what he thought about the British press. Nothing inappropriate. But there was something beneath the surface, a kind of testing, a subtle probing of boundaries. Then came the remarks, flattering at first, layered in humor. Comments about his appearance, his composure under pressure. Compliments on how well he wore a suit, or how calming his voice sounded in stressful situations. Again, nothing overt. Nothing that would hold up in isolation. But as the days turned into weeks, those moments began to accumulate. He started to feel watched, not in the professional sense, but personally. According to the lawsuit, the real turning point came during a private trip to Canada. The Sussexes were attending a charity engagement in Vancouver. The bodyguard had accompanied Meghan on multiple solo errands in the city, including a private visit to a boutique and an unannounced stop at a wellness center. It was during these unstructured moments, the lawsuit claims, that Meghan's behavior took a more troubling turn. Unnecessary physical closeness, extended hand touches, and a lingering presence that felt increasingly deliberate. He didn't react at first. Years of training had taught him to stay stoic, to interpret every interaction through the lens of risk and control. But what he felt during those moments wasn't risk, it was discomfort, an erosion of the professional space he relied on to do his job effectively. And with each encounter, he began to wonder, was this happening intentionally, or was he misreading it? Back in Montecito, the tension followed. The residence was less formal than royal estates, but the security protocols were still strict. Yet Meghan's casual disregard for hierarchy within her staff created unease. She invited her bodyguard to join post-event debriefs where only her inner circle was present. She requested that he accompany her on walks through private gardens, even when not on duty. According to the affidavit, these moments were rarely discussed afterward, but they left a residue. He began to dread what might come next. He tried to keep things professional, reduced eye contact, short, formal responses. But the withdrawal did not go unnoticed. Meghan, according to those who later gave testimony, became colder, less warm. There were rumors among the staff that something had shifted between them. One aide later described it like this: he looked like a man walking a tightrope, knowing that one wrong step would send him crashing. That was when he began documenting everything. Dates, times, interactions. He saved emails, archived texts, not because he was planning to sue, but because he needed clarity. He needed a record. If something escalated, he wanted to be able to say, "I told the truth." And then, it did escalate. The lawsuit described one final incident that broke the silence. It was a dinner party at the Sussex estate, a small gathering that Meghan was hosting for a few visiting friends. The guest list was tight. Security was light, but she specifically requested the presence of the bodyguard for the evening, citing comfort. The request, while odd, was not unprecedented. He obliged. Throughout the night, Meghan allegedly made several attempts to separate him from the group, asking him to check on private rooms, accompanying her to the wine cellar, lingering just a bit too long after thanking him for his service. Witnesses described her demeanor as playful, but pointed. At one point, she allegedly placed her hand on his chest during a joke, keeping it there longer than necessary. That was the last straw. According to court documents, he filed a resignation notice within 48 hours. He cited unspecified professional boundaries breached and requested that his departure be handled discreetly. Meghan's team, shocked and reportedly confused, offered him an increased salary to reconsider. He refused. The next day, he left the property without saying goodbye. Months passed. He didn't go to the media. He didn't share details with gossip blogs. But the anxiety lingered. He began seeing a therapist. According to legal filings, he was diagnosed with stress-induced insomnia, elevated cortisol levels, and symptoms consistent with emotional distress. His private life suffered. He stopped taking new clients. He isolated himself from peers in the security industry. It was only after speaking with legal counsel, encouraged by a friend in law enforcement, that he decided to pursue the lawsuit. Not for fame, not for money, but because he couldn't carry the silence anymore. When the lawsuit became public, he didn't give interviews. He didn't hire a PR firm. He let the papers speak for themselves. He believed the truth would rise through the noise. His legal team issued a single statement. This action has been brought with full awareness of its consequences. Our client does not wish to destroy reputations, but to reclaim his own. No one should ever feel unsafe in the course of their employment, regardless of who they work for. The world read those words and held its breath. Because for the first time, the man who had spent his career being invisible had spoken, and the silence that had once protected Meghan Markle was now echoing against her in the court of public opinion. In the early days of their post-royal life, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were surrounded by a sense of liberation. No longer confined by palace rules or royal traditions, they embraced the open space of Montecito, a sanctuary for stars, entrepreneurs, and influencers. There were no stiff corridors of Buckingham Palace here, no need to bow to anyone, no press officers dictating every syllable. They were free, or so it seemed, but freedom has its price. In this case, it meant Meghan Markle now wielded full control over her image, her environment, and, crucially, her staff. With fewer boundaries came fewer checks. And within that fluid ecosystem, a dynamic began to form between her and her most trusted protector, a dynamic that, according to legal filings, would turn increasingly problematic. The lawsuit painted a picture of repeated, calculated instances where professionalism was slowly, deliberately eroded. It wasn't about one explosive moment. It was about the build-up. The slow unraveling of a working relationship turned psychological minefield. It began with subtle invasions of space. The bodyguard, whose name remained withheld during the early proceedings for his own protection, alleged that Meghan would frequently touch his arm while speaking, lean in unnecessarily close, or position herself directly in his line of vision for extended periods. To an outsider, it might have seemed affectionate, even harmless. But to him, it was something else. A pressure, a presence, something that slowly made him question the environment he was in. These gestures, the filings argued, became increasingly invasive. The bodyguard cited a string of interactions, one during a private flight to New York, another at a secluded wellness retreat in Ojai, where Meghan allegedly touched him without invitation, made remarks about his appearance, and asked deeply personal questions that were irrelevant to the task at hand. One instance was particularly disturbing. While attending a charity event in Los Angeles, Meghan reportedly requested a last-minute change in her security escort for a high-profile dinner. The reason, according to internal communications later subpoenaed, was that she wanted someone familiar by her side. He was assigned. The evening went smoothly in public. Photos from the event showed Meghan glowing in a sleek black dress, standing confidently beside guests and celebrities. But according to the bodyguard's account, the real issue arose later that night, back at the hotel. In his statement, he recounted how Meghan had invited him to escort her to a private floor where the Sussexes were staying. Upon reaching her suite, she reportedly lingered in the hallway, thanking him for his work in a manner that felt performative. Then, she allegedly placed her hand on his waist and said something that would ring in his ears long after. "You don't have to be so formal with me when no one's watching." He froze, smiled, thanked her professionally, and walked away. But the discomfort lingered. At first, he tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was stress. Maybe he was reading into something that wasn't there. But the more he considered it, the more he realized that it wasn't a joke and it wasn't isolated. Weeks later, according to his claim, Meghan allegedly sent him a late-night message through her personal assistant, requesting that he escort her alone on a morning hike the following day, despite other staff being available. The note was short but specific. She wanted privacy, quiet, someone she could trust. Against his better judgment, he agreed. He didn't want to be seen as uncooperative. The hike was quiet at first, but as they reached a more secluded area, the tone reportedly shifted. Meghan began asking him if he ever missed working with Hollywood clients. She asked whether he preferred protecting celebrities or royals. Then, without warning, she allegedly asked him whether he had ever fallen for someone he was protecting. She smiled, according to the account, and said, "That's not unthinkable, right?" He didn't answer. That moment haunted him for weeks. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. With casual confidence, as if she knew he wouldn't push back. After the hike, he filed an internal memo with the private security agency that managed his assignment, expressing that he felt increasingly uncomfortable and was requesting a reassignment. The memo, which would later become a key part of the court record, was brief and deliberately vague. He didn't accuse. He only hinted, but the request was ignored. It was this moment, according to legal filings, that solidified his decision to leave. He no longer felt safe. Not physically, but psychologically. He feared that one more interaction would break him entirely, that if he continued, he might lose his ability to stay silent. He filed a formal letter of resignation a week later. In that letter, he stated clearly that his decision was based on inappropriate conduct and boundary violations that made continued service untenable. It was concise, unemotional, and deliberately constructed to avoid scandal. He expected the matter to end there. It didn't. Within 2 weeks, he received a warning from a senior representative at the agency that a non-disclosure clause in his contract was strongly enforceable, and that any public statements could result in legal retaliation. The message, while not directly from Meghan's team, felt targeted. That was when he realized the system wasn't built to protect him. It was built to protect her. Months passed. The emotional toll deepened. He began attending counseling. He withdrew from his professional networks. He struggled to sleep. Eventually, after seeking legal advice and gathering testimony from others who had witnessed the same troubling behaviors, he made the decision that would change everything. He filed a civil lawsuit. The complaint, now public record, read like a psychological journal, a careful documentation of escalation, silence, and the quiet agony of unwanted attention in a space where resistance felt professionally dangerous. The story was out. The shield of silence had broken, and the world, once captivated by Meghan Markle's carefully curated image, now had something entirely new to reckon with. An accusation not of words, but of whispers. Not of violence, but of discomfort. Not of force, but of pressure. Unwelcome, repeated, and, finally, undeniable. In any working relationship, boundaries define respect. They protect dignity, maintain professionalism, and ensure safety. But what happens when those boundaries become fluid, and saying no ceases to be a real choice? In the high-stakes world of personal security, this question takes on a weightier significance. For the bodyguard at the center of this lawsuit, the role was never meant to be just a job. It was a commitment, a promise to stand unwaveringly between the client and potential threats. Loyalty was paramount. Trust was currency. Speaking out against the very person you swore to protect was, in many ways, unthinkable. This complex power dynamic is critical to understanding the psychological tension he endured. Unlike other employment relationships, a bodyguard's survival often depends on maintaining absolute discretion and unwavering allegiance, especially when guarding public figures of Meghan Markle's stature. Experts in employment law and workplace psychology explain that this dynamic creates a gray zone where traditional protections may fall short. Dr. Amanda Fields, a workplace psychologist specializing in power dynamics, elaborates. When an employee's role requires both proximity and loyalty to a high-profile employer, the fear of professional and personal repercussions can paralyze their ability to assert boundaries. Saying no might mean risking livelihood, reputation, or even safety. The bodyguard's legal filings echo this sentiment. He describes the emotional toll of navigating a relationship where a refusal could be interpreted as insubordination and where reporting inappropriate behavior could be dismissed or met with retaliation. One revealing document from the lawsuit detailed a conversation where the bodyguard expressed unease about Meghan's late-night texts and requests for private meetings. The response, relayed through Meghan's assistant, was blunt. "This is her world. Adapt or move on." Such an ultimatum starkly illustrates the asymmetry of power. Adding to the complexity was the lack of an independent human resources department or a formal grievance procedure within Meghan's private operation. Unlike larger corporations or the royal household, which maintained channels for complaint and mediation, Meghan's household was reportedly structured as an intimate circle where formal complaints were discouraged or simply ignored. A former employee, speaking anonymously, confirmed, "If you raised a concern, you were told to handle it privately or risk losing your job." It was understood that loyalty came before everything. In this environment, the bodyguard's silence was not just a personal choice, it was a survival strategy. He faced an agonizing dilemma: preserve his career and reputation by staying silent or risk both by speaking out. The fear was not hypothetical. Within elite security circles, word travels fast, and being labeled difficult can close doors indefinitely. Further complicating matters were the psychological effects of prolonged exposure to pressure without outlets. The lawsuit claims the bodyguard suffered from anxiety, insomnia, and chronic stress, conditions worsened by the constant need to suppress his discomfort. Therapy notes, submitted as confidential exhibits, revealed a man struggling with feelings of isolation and helplessness. His resignation letter, carefully worded and without public fanfare, was an attempt to escape the toxic dynamic. Yet, even after stepping away, the threat of non-disclosure agreements and legal intimidation loomed large. His legal counsel described the mechanisms used to enforce silence as a cage of legal and social pressure. This chapter of the story raises broader questions about workplace protections for personal security personnel, particularly in private celebrity environments. Without the oversight of institutional HR or regulatory bodies, employees may find themselves vulnerable to abuses that remain hidden beneath the glitz of fame. Labor rights advocate Jenna Morales warns, there is a disturbing trend in celebrity culture where personal staff are expected to endure inappropriate conduct under threat of career sabotage. It's a systemic problem that needs urgent attention. In Meghan Markle's case, the tension between personal freedom and professional boundaries became a crucible that tested all involved. For the bodyguard, saying no wasn't merely difficult, it was fraught with real risk. As this story continues to unfold, the question remains, how many others might be trapped in similar dynamics, their voices stifled by fear, loyalty, and power? The answer may be closer than anyone expected. Prince Harry's name has long been synonymous with loyalty, to family, to Meghan Markle, and to their shared vision of a new royal path. Yet, as the allegations from the bodyguard surfaced, a question began to reverberate louder than any headline. Did Harry know? And if so, what did he do? This chapter delves into the shadowed corridors of private conversations, whispered rumors, and the complex web of loyalties that define the Sussex marriage. From the beginning, Harry was fiercely protective of Meghan. During their relationship, he stood by her through waves of criticism, media attacks, and even family tensions. Their departure from the royal fold was framed as an act of mutual support, a step to safeguard their mental health and forge a new life away from the spotlight's glare. But protecting Meghan also meant shielding her from scrutiny, a task that would now become painfully complicated. According to multiple sources close to the couple, Harry was aware, at least peripherally, of tensions within their staff. One insider hinted at quiet warnings given to Harry about potential issues, but emphasized that the prince was often shielded from details to preserve family harmony. The bodyguard's legal filings did not directly name Harry as being involved in any inappropriate behavior, but they did suggest that attempts to raise concerns internally were met with a culture of silence, a culture that Harry was either complicit in or powerless to change. The prince's public silence on the matter has been deafening. Unlike Meghan, who has released statements denying the claims, Harry has neither acknowledged the lawsuit nor commented on the broader scandal. This absence has sparked speculation across media outlets and social platforms. Some royal commentators argue that Harry's silence is a strategic legal choice, aiming to avoid jeopardizing ongoing negotiations or exacerbating the family divide. Others interpret it as a sign of internal conflict. Caught between protecting his wife and facing uncomfortable truths, the palace itself has not offered official commentary, maintaining its usual stance of discretion on private family matters. However, palace insiders, speaking anonymously, have suggested that the unfolding scandal has only deepened existing fractures between Harry and the senior royals. In 2023, an unprecedented report leaked alleging that palace security and advisors had growing concerns about Meghan's behavior towards staff. While these reports were never substantiated publicly, they added fuel to the fire of questions about Harry's knowledge and involvement. Why would Harry remain silent if aware? Some suggest the prince's devotion blinds him to his wife's flaws. Others posit that his protective instincts extend to managing the narrative, choosing silence over confrontation to avoid further public damage. A former aide to the Sussexes remarked, "Harry is torn. On one hand, he wants to support Meghan unconditionally. On the other, he's aware that some issues can't be ignored. But he's not a man who thrives in conflict, especially within his own family." This tension has played out not just in private, but publicly. Harry's recent engagements often avoid direct mention of Meghan. Interviews focus on broader issues like veterans' welfare and mental health, steering clear of personal controversies. Analysts interpret this as an effort to separate himself from the legal storm engulfing his wife. Social media reactions reflect the divided public perception. Some sympathize with Harry's silence, seeing him as a man trapped between a rock and a hard place. Others criticize him for perceived passivity, accusing him of tacitly enabling behavior that harms others. Regardless of opinion, Harry's silence has consequences. It shapes the narrative, influences public sentiment, and impacts the legal proceedings that continue behind closed doors. This chapter doesn't claim to provide definitive answers, but rather highlights the complexity of loyalty, love, and responsibility in a world where personal and public lives collide. It asks the viewer to consider, if you were Harry, caught between family, love, and truth, what would you do? Speak out and risk shattering the marriage? Or protect the one you love and bear the burden alone? As the Sussex saga unfolds, one thing is clear. Prince Harry's role is pivotal, and his choices will echo far beyond headlines. The night everything changed was, at first, unremarkable. A private event in Montecito, an intimate gathering with close friends and trusted colleagues. Meghan Markle, radiant and composed in designer attire, played the perfect host. Her guests laughed, the clinking of glasses filled the air, and the soft glow of outdoor lighting cast a warm ambience. To the outside observer, it was another successful evening in the life of a woman accustomed to the spotlight. But beneath that veneer, tensions simmered, unseen, unheard, but palpably growing. The bodyguard had been by Meghan's side all evening, performing his duties with quiet professionalism. Yet, as the night wore on, witnesses later testified to a subtle shift. Meghan's attention, which had been diffuse and friendly, began to focus intently on him. Invitations to step away from the crowd became more frequent, the touches more lingering, the tone shifting from casual banter to something charged with intention. One former staff member recalled how Meghan asked the bodyguard to accompany her to a secluded garden area just beyond the party's reach. The conversation, initially light, turned personal. Guests nearby could overhear fragments, words about trust, loyalty, and being seen for who you really are. Then, according to the lawsuit, the moment that shattered the fragile boundary. Meghan allegedly attempted a physical advance, pressing against him with an intensity that startled the bodyguard. When he tried to withdraw, she reportedly responded with words that blurred consent and power. "You don't have to resist me." That night, the bodyguard left the party shaken, his professional role irrevocably compromised. It was the breaking point, the incident that crystallized months of discomfort into a definitive conclusion. He could no longer serve in this capacity. Within hours, he began drafting his resignation letter. But stepping away from such a high-profile role was easier said than done. Meghan's team reportedly attempted to dissuade him, offering incentives to stay and promises of mediation. They warned of potential legal consequences if he spoke publicly. But the bodyguard, feeling trapped and betrayed, held firm. This confrontation marked a rupture, not just between employer and employee, but within the very fabric of the Sussex household. The fallout was swift. Staff members took sides, loyalties fractured, and whispers of the incident leaked quietly through trusted channels. The palace, though officially silent, was rumored to have been briefed informally by security consultants who expressed deep concern over the allegations. For Meghan, the repercussions were deeply personal. Sources close to her described sleepless nights, tearful breakdowns, and mounting anxiety over a narrative spinning beyond control. The woman who once radiated confidence was now reportedly grappling with vulnerability, isolation, and fear. Her inner circle attempted damage control, engaging crisis PR teams, issuing carefully crafted statements, and urging media outlets to respect privacy. But in the age of social media and relentless press, privacy is a luxury few can afford. The bodyguard's decision to file a lawsuit opened floodgates. More former staff came forward anonymously with stories of boundary crossings, emotional manipulation, and a work environment that was highly charged and difficult. Yet, amidst the chaos, Meghan maintained a public front of strength, releasing denials and affirmations of her commitment to professionalism and respect. This chapter in the unfolding saga serves as a stark reminder. Even the most polished public figures can face private struggles with power, control, and consent. As viewers, we are left to question how such a breakdown could occur beneath the surface of glamour and fame, and what it reveals about the complex interplay of vulnerability and dominance in the lives of those living in extraordinary circumstances. The filing of the lawsuit marked a seismic shift in the Meghan Markle saga, a legal earthquake that sent shockwaves through royal circles, Hollywood, and media landscapes worldwide. What began as whispered rumors and guarded conversations exploded into a public battle fought not just in headlines, but in courtrooms and legal documents. The bodyguard's complaint, submitted to the Los Angeles Superior Court, was meticulously detailed and painstakingly thorough. Unlike the sensationalized rumors circulating on social media, the lawsuit presented a structured narrative supported by dates, communications, and corroborative witness statements. It read like a carefully constructed legal tapestry, weaving allegations with context and evidence. Among the charges were claims of harassment, abuse of power, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The complaint alleged that Meghan Markle had repeatedly crossed professional boundaries, subjected the plaintiff to unwelcome physical contact, and created a hostile work environment. The documents also suggested that efforts to address the situation internally were stonewalled or ignored. The initial public reaction was a mixture of shock, skepticism, and intrigue. News networks interrupted scheduled programming to cover the story. Opinion pieces flooded online platforms, dissecting the implications. The royal family, traditionally known for measured silence, was thrust into an uncharacteristically reactive posture, carefully distancing themselves while managing internal fallout. Meghan's legal team issued a swift rebuttal. Their statement declared the allegations categorically false and without merit, emphasizing Meghan's commitment to professionalism and respect in all interactions. Yet, the terse response did little to quell the storm. To many, the battle lines had been drawn. Netflix and other partners, who had previously invested heavily in projects involving the Sussexes, suddenly found themselves navigating a PR minefield. Behind closed doors, executives reportedly held emergency meetings to assess risk, weighing potential fallout against contractual obligations. Some industry insiders whispered of renegotiations and postponed releases. Meanwhile, the media frenzy intensified. Investigative reporters dug into the backgrounds of both parties. Experts in celebrity law and employment disputes weighed in, adding layers of analysis to an already complex narrative. Legal analysts pointed out the high stakes involved. The case was not just about individual claims. It could set precedents for how high-profile employees and employers navigate accusations within private households. The question of how non-disclosure agreements interact with claims of misconduct was especially pertinent. At the same time, The Bodyguard's team carefully released select pieces of evidence to the press. Emails expressing discomfort, internal agency memos, and witness affidavits slowly emerged, each leak strategically timed to sustain pressure and public interest. The Sussex camp responded by reinforcing their narrative of victimhood and media persecution. They framed the lawsuit as a coordinated attack, aimed at damaging Meghan's reputation and undermining the couple's philanthropic efforts. Amidst the legal wrangling, human stories emerged. Former staff, speaking anonymously, described an environment of fear and intimidation, where speaking out was discouraged. Mental health professionals expressed concern about the emotional well-being of all parties involved. Public opinion was fractured. Some saw the lawsuit as a necessary reckoning, a reminder that fame and privilege do not exempt anyone from accountability. Others viewed it as a calculated smear campaign, a dark chapter in a long-running royal soap opera. As court dates loomed and legal teams prepared for battle, the question on everyone's lips was not just about guilt or innocence, but about the consequences this case would have for the future of celebrity, royalty, and power. The legal earthquake had shattered facades, upended alliances, and laid bare the vulnerabilities that even the most powerful cannot escape. The moment the lawsuit became public, its reverberations rippled far beyond the courtroom walls, triggering a cascade of consequences that few could have anticipated. Meghan Markle's carefully crafted public image, once celebrated as a beacon of modern royalty and empowerment, now faced unprecedented scrutiny, with allies and critics alike reassessing their positions. The entertainment and corporate worlds reacted swiftly. Deals that had been quietly in negotiation were suddenly placed on hold. According to industry insiders, a high-profile streaming platform paused development of a planned documentary series involving the Sussexes, citing ongoing legal complication. Hollywood, known for its fierce loyalty to stars, found itself divided. Some of Meghan's closest collaborators released statements expressing support while urging respect for the legal process. Others, however, adopted a wait-and-see stance, mindful of reputational risk and audience sentiment. In private conversations, agents discussed the challenges of navigating an alliance with a figure now entangled in such a high-profile scandal. At the same time, feminist groups and advocacy organizations that had previously championed Meghan's causes were faced with difficult questions. How to reconcile support for a woman who had spoken passionately about boundaries and respect with serious allegations of boundary violations herself. Some groups remained steadfast in their backing, emphasizing the principle of presumed innocence. Others expressed cautious concern, seeking to understand the complexities before taking a public stance. Media coverage became relentless. Tabloids and news outlets dug into every available detail, revisiting past interviews, speeches, and events for clues. Some commentators framed the story as a cautionary tale about the intoxicating effects of power, while others interpreted it as a broader cultural reckoning with the blurred lines between celebrity and accountability. Social media platforms exploded with discussion. Hashtags trended, opinion polls surged, and fan communities splintered. Supporters launched fundraising campaigns to back Meghan's legal defense, while detractors created pages dedicated to compiling allegations and criticism. The digital battleground was fierce, emotional, and unrelenting. Meanwhile, within Meghan's personal circles, the pressure mounted. Reports surfaced of canceled appearances, postponed public engagements, and strained relationships with longtime friends. Montecito neighbors noted a visible change, fewer outings, increased security, and an air of retreat. Prince Harry, grappling with the storm engulfing his wife, was reportedly dividing his time between public duties and private crisis management. Sources revealed that the couple sought counsel from high-profile crisis PR experts and legal strategists, aiming to contain the damage and rebuild their narrative. Yet, despite these efforts, the lawsuit's impact was undeniable. It chipped away at public trust, challenged long-standing alliances, and forced a reckoning within Meghan's own support system. The fallout also reignited debate about the role of media in shaping narratives, whether the relentless coverage was fair scrutiny or invasive character assassination. Journalists defended their work as essential to transparency, while privacy advocates decried what they termed a trial by media. As this chapter closes, the question remains: Can a public figure recover from such an all-encompassing controversy? Is redemption possible in an age where every misstep is amplified and archived indefinitely? For Meghan Markle, the fallout was just beginning, and the world was watching closely.